Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to talk about Sara, one of the newest characters in Genshin Impact, a 4-star who came out in patch 2.1. She's an electro support or burst support, sub DPS, whatever you want to call her, who's pretty good at giving your team an attack buff through her elemental skill and burst, and dealing a decent amount of damage with that burst. She's a character who a lot of people are confused as to how to play, how to build, because her kit isn't that straightforward and there are many different ways to build her, so I want to break all of that down in as much detail as possible in this video. Also, as always, I want you guys to know that I stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested. Come say hi, it's usually a fun time. And with that being said, let's get into it. So first up, I want to talk about how to play Sara, how to utilize her kit and fit her in a rotation. Sara is a character who a lot of people are still confused about because her kit is kind of complicated, especially if you don't really understand how her skill works. Her elemental skill has a few different parts. First of all, when you press your elemental skill, you're going to start by retreating. So as you can see, Sara will teleport, and then after that, you'll be infused with this crow feather thing for 18 seconds, which will basically infuse your next charge attack. In fact, when you do an aim shot, whether it's on the ground or on an enemy, it will leave this sort of mark on the ground that will explode and buff whichever character is in it. On top of that, it will deal electro damage and give you some particles, which is pretty nice. But the most important part is that it grants the character inside of it, so whichever active character you're on, an attack bonus based on your base attack. This is very important and the main reason why you're using Sara, because this attack bonus you're gaining is very nice. There are a couple of very important things to keep in mind with this skill though, especially if you want to play her optimally. So I want to get into that. First of all, you should know that, as I mentioned, this scales off of your base attack. That means that the weapon you put on your Sara is very important because base attack only comes from two sources: your character themselves, so like, Sara's base attack when you level her, it does increase their base attack, and her weapon. So the higher base attack your weapon is, the higher your buff is going to be. If you're running a weapon with a relatively low base attack versus one with a higher base attack, it will significantly change the attack bonus you're giving. Because of that, the weapon you put on her is very important, so do keep an eye out for the weapon section later in the video. And while it is probably common knowledge by now, I just want to repeat that base attack and flat attack are not the same thing. So like your feather and just anything on your artifacts won't increase this buff, whereas a good base attack on your weapon and a higher character level will. Other than that, I do want to talk about this attack buff because it's a main reason you're using this ability, as I mentioned. Since the damage of your skill isn't really that high, the attack bonus you're gaining is pretty nice. The biggest downside or disappointment with this ability is that the duration isn't that long. It's only 6 seconds, and when you compare it to something like Bennett's ult or the Noblesse Oblige 4-piece, it's really kind of short. However, when you pair this with a character who can snapshot, you can really make the most of this ability. A good example of this is Beto's Burst, who basically will keep all the buffs. If you buff the character at the start of the burst, it'll take the buff in for the entire duration. So it will basically extend Sara's 6-second buff to all this 15-second duration of her burst. That is why when you pair Sara's attack buff with a character who can snapshot, it can effectively make this duration a lot longer and more efficient. Now, to show you guys what I mean, since this is a complete guide, I have explained snapshotting in the past, but basically with characters like Beto's Burst, who can snapshot buffs for the entire duration, it'll extend the duration of the attack buff. So just to illustrate, basically, you'll see my Beto before getting buffed has 1600 attack. Once you get buffed, it'll go all the way up to 2100. Now, if I use my burst, when I am buffed, it's doing 10,900 with the attack buff. Now, even if the buff were to expire mid-duration, so let's check now. Yeah, the buff expired. I'm still going to be dealing 10,900, as you can see. When I crit, I didn't crit there. Okay, I'm not critting. Yeah, it's still doing 10,900, despite my attack being lower, which is one way to effectively make this 6-second attack bonus last longer. Now, something else you really should know regarding your rotations and how to actually use the skill is that normally you're going to be charge shotting, right? You can charge shot the ground, you can charge shot the enemy, it's up to you. Charge shotting the ground can be easier, but charge shotting an enemy can deal more damage. For example, let's say you're fighting this Rune Guard, you press E, you can either charge shot the ground or just charge shot him, and then it'll explode, like the thing will be placed on the ground, it'll explode and buff your character. I also wanted to specify, and I'm recording this later, so my voice might sound different, but if you do have your second constellation, the way you're going to play Sara changes, but we'll cover this mainly in the constellation section, so look out for that. Sara's elemental burst is good, but pretty straightforward. Basically, you'll deal one big instance of AoE electro damage that actually has a pretty high scaling, right? This is almost 600 at level 6, and it does go up significantly. And then it also deals 4 instances of this other Tengu Jurai hit that summons 4 clusters around you, and it goes up to 6 at your 4th constellation. On top of that, both of these instances of damage will provide the active character with attack bonus, the same attack bonus as your elemental skill. They don't stack, but it basically refreshes the cooldown or refreshes the duration of the attack buff, which is quite nice. So basically your burst is just a nice amount of damage and will give the active character that attack bonus, as well as proccing the Noblesse Oblige 4-piece if that is what you choose to run on your artifacts. Do keep in mind though that the cooldown is quite long with 20 seconds, and it does have a high energy cost of 80, meaning that you have to build her properly to make up for this so that you can spam your burst whenever you have it. Lastly, for for your passive talents, your first one decreases the aim shot charge time when you're in the crow feather state, so in your elemental skill, which is convenient. And then your other passive will give energy to your team when your elemental skill hits opponents. Basically, when the second part of your skill explodes and deals damage to enemies, Sara is going to restore 1.2 energy to all party members for every 100% energy recharge she has, which honestly isn't that much since it's only 1.2 energy for every 100% ER, and you're not going to have like that much energy recharge, but it is a nice bonus for your party members if they do have high energy cost bursts. Overall though, I know this is a character who was overwhelming for a lot of people, especially like this part. A lot of people were asking me how to play her, and so as a very brief summary, basically if you're not Constellation 2, you're going to have to do a charge shot after you use your elemental skill to buff whichever character is in it, and then when you use your elemental burst, it'll deal damage and also buff the attack of the active character. Her rotation can be a bit clunky if you're not, once again, C2, because you will have to charge shot, but honestly, since it does retreat you to somewhat safety, or if you're running a shield, getting that charge shot in usually isn't that big of a problem. Regarding your talent priority, be sure to prioritize your elemental skill first, because the attack bonus is what scales here. Even when you use your burst, the scaling of the attack bonus does depend on your elemental skill's talent level. After your skill, I would level your elemental burst, and then I wouldn't level your normal attacks unless you're DPSing. So now to talk about Sara's best builds, there are quite a few options. For your artifact sets, you're either going to be going for the 4-piece Noblesse Oblige or the 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate. Both of them are good and give you a bit of a different role. The Noblesse Oblige is what I like as a general support, because first of all, the 2-piece gives you 20% burst damage, and then the 4-piece will buff your entire party member's attack by 20% whenever you use your burst. This is really good because Sara already gives you an attack buff, much like Bennett, and then the Noblesse will give you another one, making her pretty good at amplifying your damage. On top of that, this buff does last longer than your skills buff, which is 6 seconds, since this one does last for 12. Now, if you want your Sara to deal more damage, or if you're already running a Noblesse user, for example, a lot of healers in the game do tend to run 4 Noblesse, so you might be pairing your Sara with someone like a Diona, you can use the 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate, which will give you more damage. This set is also very good because the 2-piece gives you 20% energy recharge, and the 4-piece set increases your burst damage by 25% of whatever your energy recharge is. And since Sara is a character who wants quite a bit of energy recharge, this emblem set will give you a lot of burst damage, making it the best set for her damage, whereas Noblesse is the best set as a pure support. Overall, the one you should run is more so preference and depending on your team. I think Noblesse Oblige is better as a general support set, and it is useful even if your artifacts are pretty bad or you don't have that much damage to begin with, whereas Emblem can be more rewarding at high investment, can be really good for your Sara's damage like herself, and can be good especially if you already have another Noblesse user in your team. And there are other viable sets like the 2-piece Thundering Fury paired with another 2-piece, or like Thunder Soother in an Electro team, but generally speaking, I would highly recommend going either Noblesse or Emblem, with Noblesse being my preferred one to buff your team. Now for the specific pieces you want, first of all, on substats, it's pretty straightforward. Since Sara is someone who does like energy recharge, usually you want to be getting just enough to where you can spam your burst on cooldown, and so it is a substat that you want. Other than that, crit damage and crit rate are amazing, and attack percent is obviously nice as well. For your main stats, you definitely want an electro damage bonus goblet and a crit circlet, as those will give you the most damage. But for your sands, this is where it can get a bit tricky. Energy recharge and attack percent are both amazing, and the best one really depends on your situation. If you already have enough energy recharge to spam your burst on cooldown, if without the ER sands, if you're running an attack sands, you can spam your burst on cooldown, then you want to go for attack because it will give you more damage. Even if you're running the emblem set, which gives you some damage based on your ER, attack percent will still be more damage. So it is always what I recommend to maximize your burst, but energy recharge can be better if you do need more ER to spam your burst, and especially with a 4-piece Noblesse where you're just really more of a support than a damage dealer, having that energy recharge can be very comfy and really nice. Now do keep in mind your sand selection can depend on your weapon. If you're running a just very high base stack weapon like the Skyward Harp, you very probably want to go for energy recharge on the sands, whereas if you're running an energy recharge weapon, something like a sacrificial bow, which can be very good for Sara, since this will give you a lot of energy recharge at level 90, you might need less on your artifacts and might be able to get away with an attack sands without too many energy issues. In fact, I guess now's a good time to talk about weapons, and this is actually a really important and somewhat misunderstood, at least from what I've seen, section about Sara. The reason why it's so important is because, as I mentioned in the talent section, she scales off of your base attack. That means that your weapon is extremely important, and weapons that have higher base attacks at level 1, obviously when you level them up, it'll be a drastic difference. For example, a weapon like Skyward Harp that has a base attack of 48 at level 1 scales all the way up to giving you 674 base attack at level 90, which is absolutely huge. Since you are primarily an attack buffer as Sarah, every bit of attack you gain or can give to another character does matter. And so while other things on the weapon can be important, like a good substat, energy recharge, or even damage, having a high base attack is usually favored if you have the choice to just give your team more damage. Now, while base attack is important on a weapon, you also tend to want energy recharge, since again, Sarah is a character as a high energy cost burst who does want ER. That means that bows like Sacrificial Bow and Favonius can be very good options. Now, keep in mind, regarding these two weapons, I tend to prefer Sacrificial Bow a lot more, and I would rank Sacrificial Bow as being the best 4-star ER weapon, since the base attack is very high. It has 44 at level 1, and it can also reset your skills cooldown, which in practice hasn't been that useful for Sarah because of the way like you have to charge shot and then you don't have a big window of attack buff, but overall the base attack and the ER stat make up for it. Favonius will give more particles to your entire team though, and provide you with higher energy recharge, so this can be a very good option, and it's also a free-to-play bow since you do get one for free from a quest, but Sacrificial with the higher base attack usually outscales it, especially in the late game. For an exact weapon ranking though, here it is. Skyward Harp has the highest base attack, so this is what I recommend when you're min-maxing. Run an energy recharge stance to make up for, you know, the lack of ER stat and you'll be fine. Then all the other 5-star bows are really good because once again, they do have high base attack, with Elegy of the End being the best, since it gives you energy recharge on the stat and buffs your entire team, and honestly, I would pick this over Skyward Harp, despite Harp having a higher base attack. But obviously, since not everyone has 5 stars, other than those options, the Sacrificial Bow would be my favorite, with Favonius also being amazing. And if you want a more offensive stat, let's say you're running an energy recharge sands and don't need more, the Blackcliff Warbow and the Alley Hunter, which both have a base attack of 44 and give you a good offensive stat, can be nice as well. Alright, so now we really have to talk about Sarah's constellations because a lot of these are misunderstood or overrated, underrated, all that, so I really want to clear this out. First of all, your first constellation is pretty much whatever. It does decrease the cooldown of your skill by 1 second anytime Tengu Jirai gives you an attack bonus or hits an opponent. This effect can be triggered every 3 seconds, and in case you're unaware, Tengu Jirai is this effect that's on your skill and your burst. As you can see, there are different types of them. There's Tengu Jirai Titan Breaker, there is also Storm Cluster, and there is Ambush. Whenever any of these deals damage or gives your character an attack bonus, you will decrease the cooldown of your elemental skill by 1 second. In practice, this is pretty easy to do because once again, there's so many different Tengu Jirais, but you're only decreasing your cooldown by 1 second, maybe 2 if you trigger this twice, which isn't the biggest of deals, but it is nice, especially if your rotation is tighter and you're spamming your skill on cooldown. Overall though, it's not your best constellation, and moving on, we do have to talk about your second one, which is a pretty big constellation that a lot of people tend to overrate and overhype. So let me explain it. This constellation is really nice because it allows you to buff your team and give that attack bonus without using a charge shot. This is a constellation that I might pull to show you guys off, but I have tested it on my friend's account, and basically when you press your elemental skill, it'll place a weaker crow feather at the ground that's going to explode, deal a little bit of damage, but mainly give the entire attack buff, the same attack buff as you normally would when you charge shot, to your active character. This is nice because in your rotations, this means you no longer need to charge shot. However, you oftentimes will still charge shot because when you do charge shot, that's what gives you all the electro particles. So the exact power level of this constellation is still kind of blurry to me because on one hand, getting the attack buff without charge shotting is really nice, but on the other hand, you lose out on a lot of particles. So it makes your rotation a lot smoother and less clunky. But since Sarah's burst is such high energy cost, you'll oftentimes want to use your charge shot anyways, unless you're running her with someone like Ball or on an insane amount of energy recharge. Your third and fifth constellation level your talents, which is honestly pretty nice. And then your fourth constellation basically will give you a bit more burst damage by increasing the bonus hits you gain from 4 to 6. By bonus hits, I mean the second instance of damage, these Tengu Jirai Storm Clusters. Instead of dealing 4 times whatever this number is, you'll deal 6 times roughly 50 at this talent level, which is okay. It's a slight increase in damage, but it's really not the biggest constellation. Your sixth constellation is a very interesting one, which is really good in electro teams. Basically, for characters who had their attack increased by your skill, their electro damage will gain 60% crit damage. So effectively, when you're running Sarah with other electro characters, when you buff their attack, they'll gain more crit damage on whatever electro damage they're dealing, which can be nice when paired with a Beidou, a Keqing, or even a Raiden Shogun. Now, one thing to keep in mind with this constellation is while your attack buff snapshot, this one doesn't. So when you use this with something like Beidou's Burst, it won't last the entire duration, which is really unfortunate because this is a constellation that in my mind should have snapshotted, or at least would be a lot better if it did. Overall though, it is great in Electro comps, especially when you consider that she does synergize well with a character like Raiden Shogun, so it is a pretty good constellation, but very niche, only good in Electro teams. Overall, she does have a few good constellations, and like her second one does make your rotation smoother, but she is a perfectly fine unit at C0 and isn't really constellation dependent. Okay, now I want to talk about Sara's teams and the synergies she has with other characters. Now, Sara's a particular case because in most of my videos, I try to give you guys, I talk about synergies for every character, but also give you guys examples of teams where the character shines. For Sara, however, since she gives you an attack buff to your party members, she is quite flexible and can just fit many teams similarly to many other supports without necessarily having some teams where she's like always the best option or that are built around her. Because of that, she can be on like the other team than your Bennett, right? Because Bennett gives you a lot of attack percent. You can run Sara on another as a sort of mini Bennett, although she's not a healer. Because of that, for this section, I'm mainly going to define characters she has good synergy with and talk about her strengths paired with specific characters instead of giving you guys just a bunch of example teams, because again, she is quite flexible and can fit most team comps without necessarily being meta defining for any. One of the biggest synergies I see with her though is when paired with Raiden Shogun. These two Electro characters both have high energy cost bursts. Raiden can easily help you gain Sara's burst back on cooldown because Raiden does regenerate energy with her burst, and is obviously a character who wants to be paired with other units that also have high energy cost bursts. On top of that, Sara, especially with her Constellation 6, does provide you with a lot of damage, right? Her elemental skill and burst gives you attack percent, and her 6th constellation will give you that crit damage, which is really nice for Electro characters. Also, with a character like Beidou, Sara can be a pretty good option, but your rotation is very tight, and so a more general option with Beidou is usually Fischl. But if you do want to run Sara with her, you can. The way you're going to want to play this is quite unique though. You want to make sure you give the attack buff to your Beidou before she uses her burst so that it snapshots, and you want to try to get a perfect parry on your Beidou before you use your burst. Other than that, Sara also synergizes well with a lot of Anemo characters. In fact, characters like Kazuha, Venti, or even Jean, who can all swirl and give the Verdescent Vener effect, reducing the resistance of Electro, can be very nice in Electro teams. And specific few Anemo characters, Venti for example, can snapshot their bursts, which is really good because they can snapshot the attack bonus of Sara. Generally, characters whose burst snapshots and who can keep Sara's 6-second attack buff for the entire duration of their burst are characters who synergize well with Sara. Someone like Beidou, who can snapshot the attack buff, someone like Venti, who can also snapshot it. Kazuha's burst also works, and he's very good at not only grouping up enemies, but also giving you that elemental damage bonus with his passive, are examples of great units for Sara. A character like Xiangling also snapshots, but generally speaking, it's hard to fit Sara in a Xiangling team since she wants some specific characters, notably Bennett, who already gives her a lot of attack and pyro particles. I've also been testing quite a few Eula teams with Sara, and generally speaking, they work, but with the current Abyss rotation, it's very awkward, so it's hard to test properly. But basically, Sara can proc Superconduct for your Eula and can give you a decent attack buff. However, the main problem is that their attack buff on the elemental skill does only last 6 seconds, which isn't long enough to stay for the entire duration of Eula's burst, which usually makes you either end slightly earlier or, just have it for like your auto attacks, but not the explosion. And while I touched on it briefly earlier, I do want to emphasize that Sara's 6th constellation, despite not snapshotting, does synergize well in Electro teams. So if you are running Electro characters who deal, a lot of Electro damage, think of an Electro Keqing, for example, you can run Sara with her for that constellation, the attack buff, and also the Electro particles. Also, I did want to mention that teams where you pair Sara with Kazuha and Bennett can be very good in a quick swap style, but once again, as with many iterations of this team, it's usually Kazuha doing like the heavy lifting in this team with Bennett Kazuha, but Sara actually does provide a good attack bonus and a lot of Electro damage, especially when paired with Ball and these two other characters. I really like this example team, although it is very annoying in the current floor 12 with the Electro infusion on the first part and the high tide low tide mechanic, which make Raiden a lot worse. Overall though, I believe it's important to emphasize that Sara is quite flexible, so you can oftentimes play her with the characters you like as your last flex support, giving you attack and some damage. I know a lot of people were very confused about her power level and like how to play her, so I hope this guide cleared that out. Also, I'm not including a showcase in this video because she's just a team buffer. Like, she just gives you attack and her burst does a nice amount of damage, but any team I'll put her in will just let like the DPS character shine a lot more than her. So it would have been just like a Eula showcase or maybe a Raiden showcase, Beidou showcase, not really a Sara one, so I didn't feel like it was needed. With that being said, I really hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to follow me on Twitch and subscribe if you're new because it really means a lot. Join the Discord if you want to, and with that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.